This is Newsweek with Derek Bateman. There was painful reading in the Times this week with an investigation into systematic grooming of teenage girls for sex perpetrated mainly by Asian men. As we heard in the news bulletin, some have been jailed, and now Jack Straw has stepped in with controversial remarks about the views of some Asians towards white women. Part of the story was how the racial origin element was kept out of the media in order to avoid a racially based reaction. Well, this is sensitive territory, but the way in which white girls were drugged and lured into exploitation, then passed around in a way no Muslim would accept for an Asian female, raises serious questions. I spoke to Mohammed Shafiq, Chief Executive of the Ramadhan Foundation.
I was aware of what was happening 2 years ago when I featured in a Panorama programme, and I took the initiative to speak out, that there are people around this country who are using drugs and crime to groom white teenagers under 16. And that, I believe, is a crime against humanity. It's a crime against all communities. And Islam is very clear that Islam does not tolerate this sort of behaviour. And so someone had to take a stance, and I took the stance 2 years ago. I was vilified for it at the time, both by the police and some people in the community who felt I was doing the work of the BNP and the far right. But actually 2 years on, after my piece in the Times, I'm actually seeing more people come up to me and support me. I've received inundated with calls and emails saying how sick people find this and recognise that the threat is real, that there are gangs operating across the country, even in Scotland. I think in Glasgow there are allegations of some gangs operating in Glasgow. So yes, this is a problem that affects most of the country, and it's right that we stand up and speak out against it.
Why did you find you come up against a desire for some kind of silence, particularly from the authorities? I can almost get the angle coming from the Asian community who might be embarrassed or upset by it.
My allegation 2 years ago was that I believe that the police were reluctant to speak about this openly because of fear of being branded racist. And I was quite blunt in my assessment at the time. I was vilified for that by the police and the authorities. They felt I was talking rubbish and without any substance. And actually, 2 years on, we're actually seeing the police themselves, West Mercia Police Chief Inspector Edwards, who's actually more or less says exactly the same thing I said 2 years ago. The reason I did the piece in the Times was because I wanted to have an open and honest debate in this country on this issue. I'm hoping by doing that we'll be able to bring an open debate across the country where government and civil society can come together and say this is unacceptable, this sort of behaviour should not go on, and we should do whatever we can to protect these young girls from these sort of evil men.
Well, was it part of your case, though, that by putting it, shoving it under the carpet in a way, that eventually, when it emerged, in a way that if you didn't want to do the BNP's job, that was the worst way of going about it?
Yes, I mean, that was my view. When I saw literature being distributed in some parts of the country by the BNP, taking advantage of this situation, I felt that there was nobody standing up from the Muslim community or the British Pakistani community and actually speaking up on this. And I wanted to demonstrate to the white community in this country that the Muslim community, the Asian community, the black community, the minority communities find these crimes abhorrent. I mean, I did receive hate mail 2 years ago from members of my own community who felt I was doing the work of the BNP and making life difficult for the community. But actually, to be fair to the community, we've seen a lot of support over the past few days.
Is there evidence, though, that the perpetrators here, the ones who do have an Asian background, I mean, do they take the same view about women, about these females, or do they have a different view towards the girls involved because they are white?
It pains me to say this, but I think these evil men believe that the white girls are trash. They believe they have less morals. They believe they are less valuable than their own daughters and sisters. And in many cases, these men, some of them are married, some have children themselves. The second reason, I think, is a case, is the fallback on the community. Many of these gangs choose white girls because they know that there wouldn't be no fallback on them within the community. If they were to pick a Muslim girl, then what would happen is that there would be members of the community who would be in uproar, and that would cause a lot of problems for that person and that person's family. And therefore, if they pick a white girl, there's less chance of that happening. And so that's the situation. And actually, I think that's a form of racism. It's abhorrent and it's unacceptable that you treat somebody else's daughter, somebody else's sister differently or less valuable than your own daughters and sisters. And as a father of 3 daughters, I see these girls who've been so vulnerable, and I see them as my daughters and my sisters, and we've got to do what we can to protect them.
Is there a terrible contradiction here in that we read these awful stories of mercy killings sometimes, and it's because the men are allegedly defending what they'd call the honour of a woman or of the family, and yet when it comes to, in these particular cases, dealing with the white girls, an entirely opposite view of females is adopted.
You've made a very valuable point. The situation is that you can't on the one hand talk about honour of the family and the community and the faith, and then on the other hand disregard the actions of individuals, family members or friends or members of the community that have carried such acts out. I think the community is starting to wake up to the reality of this. Only this week we've seen the case of the Derby gang who've been sentenced. And so people are seeing that in the news bulletins, listening to you on the radio, and it's becoming a reality for people. And that's why I think parents up and down this country find that abhorrent. And it's right that the government and the Home Office do a review of this.
Just lastly, we're not just misreading this, are we? I mean, in the cases where people have been convicted, the overwhelming number of them are from somewhere on the subcontinents where their families came from. But the addresses of Leeds, Manchester, Skipton, Blackpool, Rotherham, Oldham, Blackburn, these are the places where many Asian families settled when they came to Britain. Therefore, is it not just numerically the case that bad apples will be from that community?
I think if you look at the figures on child abuse, 85% of child abuse cases are white. We see
and on the internet it's higher. It's almost all white men.
All white men. You could use that argument for any community. I mean, the reason I'm speaking out is because a few years ago I spoke to some mothers whose daughters had been groomed this way, and they actually felt that the religion of Islam and the Muslim community sanctioned this sort of behaviour and these sort of acts. And therefore, that's the moment when I wanted to get involved and speak up on this issue.
And have imams done the same thing? Are you being backed in the community?
I think there's been a sea change. I have to say honestly that 2 years ago there was a lot of frowning, there was a lot of doors slamming in your face, there were a lot of people saying that you were bringing shame on the community for raising this issue. And actually this time it's not been as bad. And so yes, I think there's been relative support from the community, but I think it's important for the imams and the mosque committees to recognise that these contemporary issues need to be addressed in their sermons, and these young men need to be taught the value of human life and what Islam says about loving children and showing respect and tolerance towards all communities. And that's what drives me, has driven me my whole life, and that's what will continue to drive me for as long as I live.
Mohammed Shafiq in Manchester.